So after some fun with doors in the Royal Society, I'm very pleased to welcome the Right and Honourable Edward Davey, who's Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change. He's got to rush off, unfortunately, to another meeting.
To vote.
To vote, so very important. But he's fortunately taken the time out of his busy schedule to come and speak to us now. So, David, please.
Thank you, David, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for letting me come into your symposium. You've been hearing from the scientists, so I'm going to really be addressing the political aspects and the policy aspects. But I wanted to start by thanking all of you who do all the hard work developing the scientific evidence, and particularly all those who've been involved in AVOID and that programme for all your hard work over the last 4 years, highlighting the challenges that we face, identifying the potential impacts. It's been a unique multidisciplinary research programme with the Met Office, the Walker Institute, the Tyndall Centre and the Graham Institute, among others. And I think it's also been an impressive display of collaboration between academia and government. So thank you very much. It's also had successful outcomes, concrete outcomes. For example, it's materially supported the UK government and our international engagement, informing our negotiating position at Copenhagen and beyond. It's contributed to the UN's environmental programme with robust, credible and timely research, and it supported the setting of the UK carbon budgets. Now, it's fair to say that trust in people like me, in politicians, isn't as high as we would like it to be. But that means the importance of science and the rigours of scientific method when we debate policy issues like climate change are ever more important. We have to show that it's science, that it's evidence that is driving our policy. And I think that's what the public expects. And if you look at other areas of scientific research that touch the public, that is what happens. When scientists tell us that the evidence proves that smoking tobacco is addictive and can cause a whole host of medical conditions from emphysema to heart disease, the public believe them. We try to give up smoking. We hope our children never start to smoke. When scientists tell us that the prolonged exposure to the sun's ultraviolet rays can lead to cancer, we believe them because their views are based on strong evidence. We take precautions, we avoid sunburn, we cover up, we use sun cream. So if we trust in the scientific method when it comes to these health matters, why would we make an exception when it comes to the science of climate change? When it comes to assessing the health of our planet's ecosystem, we must listen to the scientists and we should believe them. Now, we heard earlier from the Chief Scientist, Sir John Bennington, and from other distinguished guests about the overwhelming scientific evidence for climate change. For overwhelming evidence is what it is. Of course, that doesn't mean there aren't uncertainties. You are scientists. You know that good science is all rightly cautious, not jumping to conclusions based on weak evidence, but identifying uncertainties and from them learning more about how systems work and how they change. So I understand that what we don't know is at least as important as what we do know. Good science is questioning, skeptical, analytical, testing theories and understanding the risks. But it's 200 years of good science, testing out uncertainties, considering those risks, that has laid the foundation of what we now understand on climate. And so I think it screams out from decades upon decades of research, the basic physics of climate change is irrefutable. Greenhouse gases warm the atmosphere and cause changes to the climate. Human activity is significantly contributing to the warming of our planet. I know Sir John talked about the impacts that are already being felt in parts of our world. When I meet ministers representing other governments at different climate change talks, I hear the experience of their people. I heard from a minister representing a Pacific island who told me that in part of the island, people go to bed wearing life jackets. The devastating impact that climate change is already happening. And while we would not want to attribute every extreme weather event to climate change, the pattern is building and the costs are rising, the human costs as well as the financial costs. The costs of the 2012 floods here in the UK could easily top £1 billion. Last month, the US Congress passed a $50 billion bill for relief for those affected by Superstorm Sandy. And President Obama said last month, some may still deny the overwhelming judgment of science, but none can avoid the devastating impact of raging fires and crippling drought and more powerful storms. I know Sir John also talked about how our hope must be to limit climate change, preventing us passing a potentially catastrophic tipping point. But the stark fact, I think, is, as we know, indisputable. Climate change is happening. We may not be able to reverse it, but we can limit it. AVOID, all the work that you've done, has highlighted the importance of keeping temperature below 2 degrees. To do so, global emissions need to be reduced urgently, and sustained deep cuts are required long term. And this all points to the importance of a comprehensive global deal in 2015. Now, it may be, as I mentioned earlier, that the art of politics is not greatly revered, but we will need every piece of political artistry we can bring to bear to make sure that we translate this scientific understanding into concrete and effective action to keep climate change within manageable levels. Action based on the science, the risks and the impacts. Action to deliver a low carbon way of life. Rewiring the global economy, becoming more resource efficient while continuing to deliver the economic growth that improves people's lives. So let me return to the actions we are taking, first here in the UK, and the actions we are taking with our European partners on the world stage. Over the last decade in the United Kingdom, there has grown and solidified a political consensus for domestic action to curb our emissions and for seeking a legally binding international treaty to provide for the same at a global level. And what we've done here in Britain actually is an immense achievement. It has not been easy, and it's been a long journey, in which all political parties have at times shown courage and leadership. But I think we can all be proud of the Climate Change Act of 2008, the first comprehensive economy-wide climate legislation of its kind, committing the UK to at least 80% reduction of carbon emissions by 2050, with 5-year carbon budgets to help us stay on track, and robust accountability with independent audit from the Committee on Climate Change. We know there's been some progress. The latest estimates for the UK greenhouse gas emissions in 2011 show a 7% fall compared to 2010. Yearly figures can fluctuate depending on a number of factors, from the state of the economy to the state of the weather, but the overall trajectory is in the right direction, recording emission reductions of more than 25% since 1990, the base year measure for the Kyoto Treaty. But the real prize is to design in long-term emission reductions through systemic change, designing out carbon. And that is where I believe the coalition government has been building on the framework created by the last Labour administration, putting muscle and flesh on the bones of the Climate Change Act. And I think it's the practical policies that we've been taking that I think are showing leadership in the world. For example, maximising energy efficiency by overhauling the housing stock through the Green Deal. I've already had the French minister, the Irish minister, and a minister from Indonesia asking me about the Green Deal. We've been setting up things like the Green Investment Bank to leverage private sector investment into low carbon. And of course, before Parliament, we now have the Energy Bill, an ambitious long-term plan for a major reform of our electricity market to help ensure we deliver on our emission reductions commitments and attract the right level of investment for low carbon infrastructure, and by the way, creating jobs and growth in the process. And I wanted to focus in on that, because too often we are told that those who go low carbon first will sacrifice their competitiveness. But I believe the reverse is the case. And it was the Prime Minister who last week reaffirmed our shared commitment to being the greenest government ever. And he said this: we are in a global race, and the countries that succeed in that race, the economies that will prosper, are those that are the greenest and the most energy efficient. So the real danger we face is not being dragged back by the measures we take on climate change, but being outpaced by other countries who are investing in clean, low-carbon economies. There's a boom market out there, £3.3 trillion, growing at nearly 4% a year, with investment in renewables outpacing that in fossil fuels. That means huge opportunities for our businesses. It means tax revenues for government, and we need them. It means jobs for our people and for society. It means insulation, not just from the pollution of fossil fuels, but from the volatility of fossil fuel prices. So I believe this drive that we are pushing for low carbon energy will be a real engine for growth, both in the UK and for hard-pressed economies around the world. And it is important to focus on the fact, when we have debates in the UK, that the UK is not alone. We are not somehow risking our competitive edge because others aren't doing their bit. Over the next year, I will be part of a concerted push by like-minded countries at the EU level to commit to a 30% reduction target in 2020 and to agree a further strong emissions reduction target for the EU for 2030. And looking wider than Europe, I recently attended the Globe International Legislators Summit. The Globe study catalogues the action already being taken in over 30 countries. South Korea, creating the legislative framework for emissions reduction targets, cap and trade, carbon tax, carbon labelling, carbon disclosure, and expansion of new and renewable energy. Australia's Clean Energy Act, now linking its emissions trading systems to the EU's. China, adopting targets to decrease both the energy intensity and the carbon intensity of its economy by 2015. And I'm encouraged by what President Obama said at his inauguration address, in which he challenged America to claim the promise brought by low carbon technology, jobs, industry, economic vitality. So those who advocate the view that no one else is doing anything, so why should we, have simply not looked around the world and seen what others are doing. Now, of course, incremental nation-specific action is very welcome, but we need to sustain and increase the emissions reductions on a global scale over the long term. AVOID has shown that to achieve a 50% chance of limiting warming to 2 degrees, global emissions need to peak in the next few years and then be followed by rapid long-term reductions. Some look at the negotiations for a legally binding successor to the Kyoto Treaty and they despair. I've been at meetings where people say the climate change negotiations will never produce a legally binding treaty. But I have to tell you, I disagree strongly. I'm given hope. The Doha conference in December last year has reaffirmed the international commitment to reaching a 2015 agreement that was set out in Durban. I'm given hope by the actions taking place all around the world in developed and developing economies that we can reach that binding treaty, that it's the next obvious natural step to consolidate the actions we are taking. I'm also given hope by our human ingenuity to find a way through problems and develop solutions. And that brings me back to the politics and the science. We now have 3 critical years leading to the end of 2015 to get the international politics aligned, to bring into agreement those representing the huge mega economies of Europe, America, China, Russia, India, Brazil, Japan, those representing developing countries, those representing those countries most threatened by climate change, and those who believe quite wrongly that they are somehow cushioned from the impact. Politicians have to make balanced choices, meeting our responsibility to look after the interests of those we directly represent or trying to work for the greater good. And that can sometimes mean the result is not clean and pretty or neat. But it is much easier to come to a reasonable and altruistic position if the technological challenge is in hand and the results are beginning to show. So my message is this: we can't leave this to the politicians to save the planet. This has to be a whole of society effort, and no contribution will be more crucial than that of the scientific community. Conceiving solutions, engineering new efficiencies, bringing new energy sources to the market. I think we share a positive vision of a green, clean energy and transport and a better, healthier way of life, and the progress of science will get us there. Thanks to programs like AVOID, the science, the risk, the impacts and the way ahead have never been clearer. But I am still confronted by people who deny that science. I'm confronted by some of the most dogmatic and blinkered people who deny that climate change is happening. And when I am, I'm reminded of that famous USA Today cartoon. You'll probably know the one. And it read, if we really are wrong about climate change, we will have created a better world for nothing. And I feel that is the message that we should be getting out there, that this is a positive agenda. It is not an agenda that anyone should be frightened of. Because in reality, those who deny climate change and demand a halt to emission reduction and mitigation work want us to take a huge, huge gamble with the future of every human being on the planet, every future human being, our children, our grandchildren, every other living species. We will not take that risk. So thank you for providing people like me with the arguments, the evidence to make the difference. Thank you.
So good time for a few questions.
Can I ask about the 2014 review of the carbon budgets, which in the gas generation strategy in December talked only about weakening the target? And I wondered how, given that we've seen the evidence today about the importance of the 2-degree target, that weakening the 2014 carbon budget would take us off a 2-degree path. What sort of pressures there are in government to continue? What sort of pressures are in government to weaken that carbon budget and then move us off that 2-degree path that we're currently on?
Well, first of all, in the analysis that my department has published, we have a central least cost pathway to 2050, which has us going down in the power sector to 100 grams per kilowatt hour in 2030. That's our central prediction. And the modelling we've done has been symmetrical around that, actually. The media have, as always, focused on the bit that goes the wrong way to 200 grams, but we have modelled going down to 50 grams by 2030. So first of all, I'd like to get that on the table. But there is a review of the fourth carbon budget next year. I have to say, I think since the fourth carbon budget was agreed by my predecessor across government, there's been a lot of progress already at the European level, which I think strengthens the hand of people like me who believe the fourth carbon budget should remain as it is. All the evidence suggests to me that it should. So we've seen the Energy Efficiency Directive in the European Union. If you look at how that and other measures that the European Union has taken, we are tracking up even towards the 30% target for 2020. A little bit of a way to go, but if we keep on, we will have made the progress which I think people in the Treasury in particular wish to see. And we will be debating this year on the back of a green paper the Commission is now working on. I was actually speaking to Commissioner Connie Hedegaard from DG Klima this afternoon. They're about to debate in the College of Commissioners in Brussels a green paper looking at the post-2020 energy and climate change package, which will consider what targets the EU need to set for 2030. And if we can make progress and be ambitious at the EU level, I think we will meet all the concerns that others in government have had about the UK getting ahead of other EU countries and making our industry somehow less competitive. It's not I don't quite see it in that way, but there are others who want to place those tests. But I actually think we're well placed for meeting those tests. And of course, we need to look at the whole of the Climate Change Act and the way that suggests carbon budgets could or couldn't be changed. So it's not simply the European test, but that is obviously the one that has most seized others. So I think we're well placed already, but I hope by the end of this year we'll be even better placed.
you. Corinne Lequeré from the Tyndall Center. You mentioned the next 3 years are critical for the international negotiations. Is there something that you think you could get from the research community that would make a difference to support your negotiations?
An excellent question. I'm not sure, but let me tell you why I think the next 3 years are critical, and maybe you can help, and with your ingenuity, think of how you might. What Durban did and what Doha last December confirmed is that we've got a 3-year run up to 2015. And that's been unusual. In the past, it's been sort of the annuality of it, and where we've never really got the, for want of a better expression, our ducks in a row to get to the treaty. So we've got 3 years, and we have to use those 3 years as if it's a sprint, not a marathon. We've really got to go for this and get going this year and next year so we can get to 2015. So we've got to identify all the key issues, and Pete Betts, well, Peter, you're somewhere. I think you'll be explaining some of those issues later on as Pete. Thank you. You don't normally say that in private. I just tell you an anecdote about Pete. You've asked for this now, Pete. We've been working really hard in Doha, and Pete, as usual, have been working so hard up most of the night, several nights in a row, and we were having the breakfast before we got the plane. I'm afraid we had to have the plane from Doha, and he was asleep on the table, almost his head in the cornflakes, but that was because of the fantastic work that he does, and he leads a fantastic team in DEC, and I think we should all be very proud of them. I'm glad you asked that question so I could make that point. But Pete will tell you the key issues, and there are a whole range of them. For example, how we define the climate change finance that we're all making available, and the private finance that will become available to help developing countries mitigate and adapt. Critical issues about how different countries will see themselves, whether we'll move away from the Annex 1 type definitions, which are incredibly unhelpful, and make sure every country is treated equally, as was the implication from the Durban platform. So there's a whole range of things. And inevitably the politics back in different countries is what's going to drive this. And I'm more optimistic now than I have been for some time. First of all, because Obama too is making all the right noises. I think they're particularly going to go for CCS. That makes a lot of logic. You can understand why they would do that. But if they can be bold, then that begins to change things. Very interesting, the People's Congress, when the Chinese leadership changed recently, they were talking about the need to develop an ecological civilization. Now, I think they're developing that idea, but I think it's a fantastic idea. Yes, it's to dealing with issues like air quality and water quality that affect Chinese citizens. And the Chinese government is doing a fantastic job, I think, in thinking long term to address those issues. When you start addressing those issues, you'll address the issue of climate change. So I think we're seeing movements, and China has been quite amazing actually in the way it's turning to its mind to this issue in a way that we need to learn from as well. So if Beijing and Washington do move, then I think that is very, very exciting. Of course, it's case to be proven. But my job really is to make sure the European Union doesn't find itself stranded. Up till now, the EU has tended to be a leader at a lot of these international climate change talks. And we should be very proud of the UK's role in that and the EU for showing that leadership role. But the question is, given the financial and economic problems in Europe, are member states of the European Union prepared to continue to show that leadership? And it would be a deep irony if America and China had moved and become ambitious, and it was the Europeans who were dragging us back. So we have to take every sinew and muscle and effort to make sure the European Union can still be a leader. I'm working with a number of other ministers in different member states who are like-minded in the way that the UK is, to have an ambitious approach, so we can organise ourselves effectively and persuade others. And what I mentioned in my speech about looking at the positive side this, the opportunities, the opportunities for green jobs in particular, I think is a message we need to get out there, because it's surprising how when you're debating around the council chamber and you're talking to ministers informally of other EU member states, how they haven't got that message that there is a positive, growth-friendly side to moving towards sustainable economies. We need to get that narrative out there much more strongly than we've done hitherto, so we can keep Europe moving forward and make sure we don't become a brake.
Minister, you talked about the importance of technological leadership, the role of the UK. And I just want to ask you a little bit about where we are on carbon capture and storage. We've had a false start in the UK, unfortunately. We now have a new gas strategy which envisages quite a significant role for gas and a new round of gas generation plant. We see internationally the growing interest in gas and in shale gas and so on. I mean, do you think this is an area where we can lead, and how close are we to having our own demonstration plant in this area?
Well, let me just first of all deal with the gas issue, because I actually think gas has a role to play in the short and medium term, and we've got to be clear about that, and committed environmentalists need to be clear about the role that gas is going to have to play. At the moment, the electricity in the UK on a daily basis, about 40% or more is being generated by coal. Now, there are some short-term factors behind that. The fact that America, using shale gas, has dumped its coal on the European market and coal prices have gone down. The fact that some coal plants are unwinding their final hours of generating before they are switched off. But nevertheless, there's a lot of coal power in the UK at the moment. And to replace that has to be a priority. And there is just no way that the best low-carbon electricity generation is going to come on in sufficient quantities in the short and medium term to replace all of that lost capacity. We're going to have a lot more gas. And in my department's carbon plan, we predict, I think it's about 26, 27 gigawatts of new gas plant between now and 2030 in our low carbon trajectory. So sometimes we get misunderstood about the role that gas is going to play. Now, longer term, of course, we can't continue to burn unabated gas, post 2030, and that's where CCS could come in. But it's on that sort of timescale. We do have a competition. I think it's a much more robust competition, learning the lessons from the attempts before. And although people say they were failed, we learned not a lot of lessons from the engineers and scientists who worked on those. And so we've got this competition with a £1 billion capital programme and then supporting revenue streams going forward. It's the best financial package, we think, in the world. We had 8 applicants for it. We've whittled it down to 4. We're going through what we call the bid improvement phase. We're now analysing the final bids of these 4 applicants. I think probably by the end of March we will announce who's going to win. Now, winning may mean going through to another round, effectively, of front-end engineering design, where the different projects will plan out to make sure that they have got everything right and they do this in an efficient way. But actually, I've been impressed by the team and what I've seen of the work, that it's an incredibly robust, rigorous process we're now going through, learning why we didn't work it last time. Actually, the technology, many people are very positive about technology, and they're less worried about that working. What we're trying to do is to make sure in the successful programs that the risks are allocated in a proper way, so it becomes not just a technically feasible system, but a commercially viable one. Because we've set ourselves the objective of having commercially viable CCS in the next decade. So this competition is about learning that to make sure we can have efficient CCS, primarily linked to gas, but potentially also linked to coal in the 2020s and beyond. And it's potentially a game changer. And I think that's why it's so exciting that Obama administration seems to be thinking this way, and indeed that the Chinese are putting a lot of investment. So I think we've got to see what we can do in the UK, but we've got to collaborate internationally to see if we can get this technology in the right place so we can make it commercially viable. I've got to go and vote. Now, I'll take another question.
All right, another question. Julia.
Julia Slingo, Chief Scientist at the Met Office. You've talked a lot about, obviously, the technological challenges and the economic growth that can surely follow from those, and I agree with you. I think, following on from Corinne's question, is how much more do you need in your negotiations to be able to sharpen up the arguments around dangerous climate change, you know, for whom, when and where, to help in driving the global international negotiations forwards? Because we're still, I think, in a place where it's still hard to win the economic argument, and therefore can we really move ahead and sharpen up further the dangerous climate change argument at the regional, local level? I wondered what your thoughts were on that.
I can give you some thoughts, but they won't be as well informed as thoughts you'll get from David Mackay or from Pete Betts or from other senior officials at DEC. But let me give you my two pennies worth about where I think we could do more. Because it's really the link between the evidence and the politics, and what I see is the problem there. Unfortunately, we do have to spend a little bit of time dealing with the skeptics and the deniers. And it's still important because they like to run a narrative which says this is costing everyone a fortune, it's putting up your energy bills, if only we just let others, let China sort out climate change, nothing to do with us, that's the way forward. And it's a polling narrative, in my view. It's ill-informed, it's wrong, and we do have to challenge that, and the science helps us. And the way we need to get that science over as effectively as possible in ways and medium. We shouldn't give up making sure as many people as possible understand that the overwhelming evidence, including the risk analysis, by the way, that we know there are uncertainties, but the risks, Alistair, shout out for action. So there's a bit of that I'm afraid we still have to do. But I am far more focused in on two areas, actually. One is on the economic growth element that you talked about, to prove those economic linkages. And I think in many ways that is the economist's job to do, but they need to have the support of the scientists and engineers as well to show the potential, to show that we can do this in a least cost way, and that not just the energy security issues, but the potential high expense of relying on fossil fuels is highly risky for our economies, and it is much better that we use energy more wisely and we can have sustainable low carbon sources. I think there's a final thing, and you're even getting twitchy wanting me to go and vote, but it's the Chief Whip will worry, so I should the final piece I think is trying to help us persuade other countries. So in Europe, there are countries who are less ambitious than others, and Poland is the one who I've talked about a lot. I adore the Polish people, but on this issue, they are holding back some of the debate, and we need to explain and actually reach out to Polish politicians and economy and businesses to show that they can change their energy mix, their energy policy in a way which won't hobble their economy. So I think identifying critical countries like Poland, I think, is very important. I think taking on, and this is linked to that, taking on some of the industries who are getting increasingly vocal in their opposition to the Europe's agenda, the steel industry and others, to show that we can produce steel in the UK and in Europe with ambitious climate change policies. So you've probably heard that for the last 10 or more years, but it still remains the case. There are some countries and some industries who have yet to be persuaded, and we should target our efforts on those. But I probably need to go now, but thank you very much indeed.